The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a golden hue across the rolling hills of the small village. It was quiet here, peaceful. Farmers worked their fields with worn hands, children played near the riverbank, and elders sat beneath ancient trees sharing stories of times long past. Life moved at its own pace in this corner of the world, untouched by the chaos that often plagued larger cities. But peace never lasts forever. One day, something strange appeared in the sky, a massive ship unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It hovered silently above the village, blocking out the sunlight and casting an eerie shadow below. People stopped what they were doing to stare up at it, their faces filled with awe and confusion. Some whispered prayers, others shielded their eyes as if staring too long might bring misfortune. When the ship finally descended, touching down on the outskirts of the village, everyone froze. A ramp extended from the vessel, and figures emerged, tall, metallic beings encased in sleek armor. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, as though every step had been calculated down to the millimeter. They carried weapons that gleamed under the fading light, emitting faint hums that sent shivers down spines. At first, no one spoke. The villagers watched nervously as the strangers approached, their leader stepping forward. He, or it, was taller than the rest, his voice deep and resonant when he addressed them through some kind of translator device embedded in his helmet. "You are primitive," the being declared, his tone dismissive. "Your technology is obsolete, your ways inefficient. We have come to claim this land for our empire." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fear mingled with anger, but no one dared speak. The villagers weren't warriors, they were farmers, artisans, mothers, and fathers who had lived simple lives without conflict for generations. How could they possibly stand against these invaders? Among the villagers stood Leo, a young man known more for his curiosity than his strength. He wasn't particularly brave or skilled, but there was something about the way the invaders looked at them, with disdain, as though they were insects, that ignited a spark within him. Leo glanced around at his people, seeing the fear etched into their faces. Then he looked back at the invaders, their arrogance radiating like heat waves. Something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about land or resources, it was about respect. And Leo knew, deep down, that even the smallest flame could grow into a wildfire given enough fuel. As the leader of the invaders continued speaking, outlining their plans to restructure the village and integrate it into their empire, Leo stepped forward. His heart pounded in his chest, but his voice came out steady. "You think we're primitive?" Leo asked, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think because we don't have your fancy machines or shiny armor, we're weak? You're wrong." The invader tilted his head slightly, clearly amused. "And what makes you believe otherwise?" he sneered. Leo didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to face his fellow villagers. For years, they had relied on simplicity, on harmony with nature. But now, faced with a threat unlike any other, Leo realized they had something far more powerful than guns or ships, they had unity. "We may not have your weapons," Leo said, turning back to the invaders, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But we know this land better than anyone. Every hill, every river, every forest. If you want a fight, you'll get one. And you'll learn exactly what war means." For a moment, silence fell over the field. Even the invaders seemed taken aback by Leo's defiance. Then, slowly, the villagers began to gather behind him, their expressions shifting from fear to determination. The leader of the invaders let out a cold laugh. "So be it," he said, raising a hand to signal his troops. "Let us see how far your courage takes you." What happened next would change everything, not just for the villagers, but for the invaders as well. Because while the outsiders had underestimated the so-called primitives, they hadn't counted on one thing, the unyielding spirit of those who refused to back down. The invaders wasted no time. As soon as their leader gave the signal, they moved with military precision, fanning out across the village. Their weapons hummed ominously as they scanned the area, targeting anything that moved. Smoke began to rise from the fields where crops once grew, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning earth. The villagers scrambled in all directions, seeking cover behind trees, rocks, or whatever shelter they could find. Leo's heart raced as he ducked behind a crumbling stone wall. Around him, chaos erupted, screams of fear, shouts of defiance, and the sharp crackle of energy blasts tearing through the air. He clenched his fists tightly, trying to steady himself. This wasn't how he'd imagined his life would go. Just hours ago, he'd been helping repair a fence near the riverbank. Now, he was leading his people into what felt like certain doom. But there was no turning back now. "Stay low," Leo hissed to a group of villagers huddled nearby. Among them was Mira, a young woman who had always been more interested in books than battles. Her hands trembled as she clutched a makeshift spear fashioned from a sharpened stick tied to a piece of broken metal. Despite her fear, she nodded grimly, ready to do whatever it took to protect her home. Leo glanced around quickly, assessing the situation. The invaders were powerful, yes, but they weren't invincible. For all their advanced technology, they didn't seem to understand the terrain. The hills, forests, and rivers that surrounded the village weren't obstacles to the villagers, they were advantages. "We can use the land against them," Leo whispered urgently to those around him. "They're expecting us to fight head-on, but we won't give them that satisfaction. We'll strike fast, then disappear before they know what hit them." Mira frowned. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that? Look at their weapons, they're not fighting fair." Leo met her gaze steadily. "Fair doesn't matter right now. Survival does. Trust me, I've got an idea." As night fell, the invaders set up camp near the edge of the village. They erected glowing barriers around their perimeter, confident that nothing could penetrate their defenses. Inside the protective dome of light, they relaxed slightly, believing the villagers too disorganized and frightened to mount any real resistance. They were wrong. Under the cover of darkness, Leo led a small group of volunteers through the dense forest surrounding the invaders' position. Each member of the team carried tools scavenged from the village: axes, farming implements, even lengths of rope. It wasn't much compared to the invaders' energy rifles and plasma cannons, but it was all they had. Leo signaled for silence as they crept closer to the enemy encampment. Through the trees, they could see the glow of the barrier and hear the faint hum of machinery. Beyond it, the invaders stood guard, their movements stiff and predictable. "This is insane," muttered Tomas, a burly man who usually spent his days hauling lumber. "We're outnumbered and outgunned. What makes you think this will work?" "It has to," Leo replied quietly. "Because if it doesn't, none of us will live to see tomorrow." Tomas hesitated, then nodded. Like everyone else, he knew there was no other choice. If they wanted to survive, they had to take risks, even reckless ones. When they reached the edge of the forest, Leo stopped and surveyed the scene carefully. Then, with a deep breath, he gave the signal. One by one, the villagers stepped forward, hurling their improvised weapons toward the barrier. Axes bounced harmlessly off the shimmering wall, and spears shattered upon impact. To an outsider, it might have looked like a futile effort, but that wasn't the point. The noise drew the attention of the invaders almost immediately. Several of them turned toward the commotion, raising their weapons and scanning the tree line. One fired a warning shot, sending a bolt of blue energy sizzling into the darkness. "Over here!" Leo shouted, stepping into view just long enough to wave his arms wildly before disappearing back into the shadows. The trap was set. The invaders, predictably, charged after him. Two squads broke away from the main group, rushing into the forest with their weapons drawn. As soon as they were gone, the rest of the villagers sprang into action. From the opposite side of the encampment, another group emerged, armed with buckets of oil and torches. Moving quickly and silently, they doused the invaders' equipment, their generators, supply crates, and communication devices, in the flammable liquid. Then, with a flick of a match, they set it all ablaze. Flames roared to life, illuminating the night sky and sending plumes of black smoke billowing into the air. Alarms blared as the remaining invaders scrambled to contain the fire, but it was already spreading too quickly. Panic rippled through their ranks as they realized they had been tricked. Meanwhile, Leo and his team led the pursuing squads deeper into the woods. Using their knowledge of the terrain, they lured the invaders into a narrow ravine where fallen logs and tangled vines made movement difficult. Once the enemy was trapped, the villagers unleashed their final surprise, a barrage of rocks and debris sent tumbling down the steep slopes, pinning the invaders beneath the rubble. By the time dawn broke, the invaders' camp was in ruins. Their supplies were destroyed, their equipment rendered useless, and nearly half their forces incapacitated. The villagers regrouped at the edge of the forest, exhausted but triumphant. For the first time since the invaders arrived, hope flickered in their hearts. They had proven that even without advanced technology, they could fight, and win. But Leo knew better than to celebrate just yet. This was only the beginning. The invaders wouldn't retreat so easily. In fact, their retaliation would likely be swift and brutal. As he looked out over the smoldering remains of the enemy camp, Leo felt a pang of unease. They had struck the first blow, but the war was far from over. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the battlefield, one thing became painfully clear. The cost of victory would be high. The morning after the ambush, the village was eerily quiet. Smoke still curled lazily into the sky from the remains of the invaders' camp, and the air carried the faint scent of charred metal and scorched earth. But beneath the surface calm, tension simmered like a storm waiting to break. Leo walked among the villagers, his face etched with exhaustion but also resolve. Despite their initial success, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had only delayed the inevitable. The invaders were arrogant, yes, but they weren't stupid. They would regroup, adapt, and return with greater force. And when they did, the villagers wouldn't have the element of surprise on their side anymore. "We need to prepare," Leo said as he gathered the elders and a few trusted volunteers in the center of the village. "They'll be back, and next time, they won't underestimate us." An elder named Elias, a wiry man with weathered hands and sharp eyes, nodded gravely. "You're right. We struck a blow last night, but it cost us. Our fields are burned, our homes damaged, and some of our people, they're gone." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he lowered his gaze. Leo clenched his jaw. He hadn't wanted anyone to die, not for this. But war didn't care about intentions. It demanded sacrifices, and already, the price was mounting. "What do we do now?" Mira asked, her voice trembling. She clutched a water flask tightly in her hands, her knuckles white. "We can't keep fighting like this forever. They'll overwhelm us eventually." "Not if we fight smarter," Leo replied firmly. "We've shown them we're not helpless. Now we need to show them we're relentless. If we can hit them where it hurts, disrupt their supply lines, sabotage their reinforcements, we might stand a chance." Tomas frowned. "And how do you propose we do that?" "Last night worked because we caught them off guard. Next time, they'll be ready for anything." Leo hesitated, then turned to face the group. "Then we give them something else to focus on. Something big enough to distract them while we strike elsewhere." Later that day, Leo stood at the edge of the riverbank, staring out at the water as it flowed steadily downstream. Beside him, Mira sat cross-legged on the ground, sketching crude maps in the dirt with a stick. Her notes were simple but effective, markings indicating key locations, potential choke points, and areas vulnerable to attack. "So what's your plan?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. "You've been pacing all morning like a caged animal." Leo exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm thinking about the dam upstream. It's old, sure, but it holds back a lot of water. If we could weaken it just enough." Myra's eyes widened. You want to flood their camp? No, Leo corrected. I want to make them think we're going to flood their camp. While they're scrambling to protect themselves, we'll send smaller teams to sabotage their equipment and cut off their escape routes. By the time they realize it's a diversion, it'll be too late. Mira stared at him, her expression torn between admiration and disbelief. That's actually brilliant. But risky. What if the dam collapses for real? We'd lose half the valley. That's why we'll reinforce it first, Leo said. We'll dig channels to redirect the water safely away from the village. It'll take time and effort, but it's better than leaving ourselves defenseless. Mira nodded slowly. All right. Let's assume this works, and I'm not saying it will. What happens afterward? Even if we manage to drive them out, they'll come back stronger. This isn't over until they decide to leave for good. Leo's shoulders sagged slightly. He knew she was right. No matter how many victories they achieved, the invaders wouldn't abandon their mission easily. They saw the villagers as nothing more than obstacles, a nuisance to be eliminated. But there was one thing Leo hadn't told anyone yet. One idea that had been forming in the back of his mind ever since the invaders first arrived. I don't think they'll stop coming until they understand something, he said quietly. Until they see that we're not just primitives scratching out a living in the dirt. We're survivors. Fighters. People who value this land more than they ever will. Mira tilted her head, studying him intently. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to show them exactly what war means, to us, Leo replied, his voice hardening. If they want a fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget. Not just here, but everywhere. We'll turn their empire against itself if we have to. Over the next few days, the villagers worked tirelessly to put Leo's plan into motion. Teams fortified the dam, digging trenches and reinforcing its weakest points. Others scouted the surrounding area, mapping out the invaders' movements and identifying targets for sabotage. Supplies were rationed carefully, and makeshift weapons were crafted from whatever materials could be salvaged. As preparations neared completion, Leo called another meeting to finalize the strategy. Standing before the assembled villagers, he spoke with quiet determination. This isn't just about protecting our homes anymore, he began. It's about proving that we're not afraid. That we won't back down, no matter what they throw at us. When the invaders look at us, they see weakness. Fear. But we're going to show them strength. Courage. Unity. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. For the first time in days, there was a sense of purpose, a shared belief that they could win, even against overwhelming odds. But as the meeting broke up and people returned to their tasks, Leo allowed himself a moment of doubt. He glanced toward the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering ominously. The invaders would return soon, and when they did, blood would be spilled on both sides. Was he leading his people to victory, or to destruction? Before he could dwell on the thought further, Mira approached him, holding out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Here, she said softly. For luck. Inside the bundle was a curved blade, its edge gleaming in the fading light. It wasn't much compared to the invaders' energy weapons, but it was sturdy and sharp, a tool meant for survival. Thank you, Leo said, gripping the hilt tightly. I'll make sure it counts. Mira smiled faintly. Just promise me one thing. What's that? That when this is over, and it will be, you remember why we're fighting. Not for revenge, or glory, or pride. But for each other. Leo nodded, his throat tightening. I promise. As night fell once again, the villagers took their positions, waiting silently for the invaders' return. Somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of engines signaled their approach. The storm was coming. And when it arrived, the villagers would be ready. The invaders returned under the cover of darkness, their ships casting long shadows across the valley as they descended. This time, they came prepared, not with arrogance, but with calculated precision. Their leader had studied the villagers' tactics from the previous attack and vowed not to underestimate them again. Reinforcements had arrived, doubling their numbers, and their weapons gleamed menacingly in the moonlight. But the villagers were ready. Hidden among the trees overlooking the dam, Leo watched as the invaders deployed their forces. They moved methodically, securing key positions around the structure while scanning the area for any sign of resistance. It was clear they suspected a trap, but they couldn't resist the lure of such a strategic target. If the dam collapsed, it would devastate the entire region, flooding everything in its path. "Let's give them something to think about," Leo whispered to Mira, who crouched beside him. She nodded grimly, her fingers tightening around the makeshift spear she carried. At Leo's signal, a small group of villagers emerged from the forest near the base of the dam. They shouted loudly, waving torches and banging metal tools against rocks to create noise. The invaders immediately turned their attention toward the commotion, raising their weapons and advancing cautiously. Meanwhile, hidden teams of villagers slipped into position on either side of the battlefield. One group headed upstream, where they began dismantling critical components of the invaders' supply lines. Another team crept closer to the enemy encampment, setting fire to tents and sabotaging equipment. Each movement was deliberate, coordinated, and completely unexpected by the invaders. As chaos erupted downstream, Leo led his main force toward the dam itself. Using ropes and grappling hooks fashioned from scrap materials, they scaled the rocky embankments and positioned themselves above the invaders' perimeter. From this vantage point, they unleashed a barrage of rocks and debris, targeting the invaders' energy barriers and forcing them to divert resources to defend the dam. "They're falling for it," Tomas hissed, grinning despite the tension. "Just like you said." Leo allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before refocusing. "Don't celebrate yet. We've still got a long way to go." The battle raged through the night, with both sides trading blows in a deadly game of strategy and survival. The invaders fought fiercely, their advanced technology giving them an edge in firepower. Energy blasts lit up the darkness, searing through trees and sending shards of stone flying in all directions. But the villagers used their knowledge of the terrain to stay one step ahead, striking quickly and retreating before the invaders could counterattack. At one point, Leo found himself face to face with an invader soldier. The being loomed over him, its armored frame towering and imposing. Its weapon hummed ominously as it raised it to strike. For a split second, Leo froze, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. Then, instinct took over. With a swift motion, Leo swung the curved blade Mira had given him, aiming for the weak spot between the armor plates. The blade connected with a metallic clang, and the invader staggered back, momentarily stunned. Seizing the opportunity, Leo rolled to the side, grabbing a fallen branch and using it to knock the weapon out of the invader's hand. Before the creature could recover, another villager, a wiry teenager named Elric, charged forward, driving a sharpened stake into the invader's leg. The being let out an electronic screech of pain and collapsed, immobilized. "Nice work," Leo panted, offering Elric a quick nod of thanks. The boy grinned nervously but didn't hesitate to follow Leo deeper into the fray. By dawn, the dam was still standing, but barely. Explosions rocked the structure as the invaders attempted to breach its defenses, likely hoping to flush out any remaining villagers hiding nearby. Meanwhile, the sabotage teams continued their relentless assault on the invaders' supply lines, cutting off access to reinforcements and vital resources. Despite their efforts, however, the tide of the battle began to shift. The invaders' superior numbers and firepower started to wear down the villagers, who were running low on energy and supplies. Wounded fighters limped back to safety, clutching makeshift bandages to bleeding wounds. Others fell silent, their bodies left behind in the chaos. Leo knew they couldn't hold out much longer. If they didn't act soon, the invaders would overwhelm them entirely. "Mira," he called, spotting her near the edge of the forest. "We need to finish this now." She nodded, her expression grim. Together, they rallied what remained of their forces, leading a final charge toward the dam. Armed with whatever weapons they could carry, the villagers surged forward, shouting defiant cries that echoed across the valley. For a moment, it seemed like madness, a last desperate gamble against impossible odds. But then, something remarkable happened. The invaders faltered. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the sheer ferocity of the villagers' assault. Whatever the reason, cracks began to form in the invaders' disciplined ranks. Soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to respond to the relentless wave of attacks coming from every direction. Some even retreated, abandoning their posts in confusion. Seizing the opportunity, Leo led a small team directly onto the dam itself. With axes and sledgehammers, they attacked the support beams holding the structure together, weakening it just enough to make the invaders panic. As the first signs of instability appeared, cracks spreading along the surface, water leaking through gaps, the invaders scrambled to evacuate. But it was too late. With a deafening roar, part of the dam gave way, releasing a torrent of water that swept away everything in its path. The floodwaters surged downstream, swallowing up the invaders' equipment and scattering their forces. Though carefully controlled to avoid reaching the village, the destruction was devastating to the invaders' operation. When the dust settled, the battlefield fell silent. Exhausted and battered, the villagers regrouped at the edge of the forest, staring out at the wreckage below. The dam still stood, though precariously, and the invaders' camp was in ruins. They had won, for now. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Leo looked out at his people. Many were injured, some grieving the loss of loved ones. But there was also pride in their eyes, a fierce determination that hadn't been there before. "We did it," Mira said softly, breaking the silence. "Against all odds, we did it." Leo nodded, though his expression remained somber. "Yeah. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." In the distance, the sound of engines roared to life once more. The invaders weren't gone, they were regrouping, preparing for another assault. And when they returned, they would come with vengeance burning in their hearts. But for now, the villagers had earned a brief reprieve. A chance to rest, to heal, and to prepare for the battles yet to come. Leo turned to face his people, his voice steady despite the weight of what lay ahead. "We showed them what we're made of today. But tomorrow, we'll show them even more. Because this land is ours, not theirs. And we'll fight for it until our last breath." The villagers cheered, their voices rising in defiance against the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The war was far from over. The victory at the dam gave the villagers a much-needed boost in morale, but it came at a cost. Dozens had been injured, and several lives had been lost. Homes were damaged, crops destroyed, and supplies dwindled to dangerously low levels. Yet, despite the hardships, there was an unspoken understanding among the villagers: they couldn't afford to falter now. Every moment of rest was precious, but every moment wasted could mean disaster. Leo stood atop a hill overlooking the village, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the invaders' ship still lingered menacingly. Though battered, the enemy showed no signs of retreating permanently. Instead, their movements suggested regrouping, reinforcements arriving, new strategies being plotted. Leo knew that time was running out. "They're planning something big," Mira said as she joined him, her voice tinged with worry. "You can see it in the way they're positioning themselves. They're not just here to take the land anymore. They want to make an example of us." Leo nodded grimly. "They've realized we're not going to roll over and die. Now they'll try to crush us completely, to send a message to anyone else who might resist." Mira clenched her fists. "Then we need to hit them before they're ready. If we wait for them to strike first, we won't survive." Leo turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "That's exactly what I'm thinking. But this time, we don't just hit them hard, we hit them where it hurts most. Their command structure. Over the next few days, Leo worked tirelessly with the villagers to devise a daring plan. Scouts reported that the invaders' leaders rarely ventured far from their central command post, a heavily fortified compound located deep within the forest. It was risky terrain, surrounded by dense undergrowth and guarded by patrols armed with advanced weaponry. Breaking through would be nearly impossible. But Leo saw an opportunity. The invaders believed the villagers too primitive to mount such a complex operation. That arrogance could be their undoing. "We'll divide into 3 teams," Leo explained during a meeting with the elders and key fighters. Team 1 will create a diversion near the river, drawing their forces away from the compound. Team 2 will infiltrate the perimeter and disable their communications systems. Meanwhile, Team 3, led by me, will go straight for the command center. Elias frowned, stroking his chin. "It's bold, but dangerous. If any part of the plan fails, you'll be walking into a trap." "I know," Leo admitted. "But if we succeed, we'll cripple their ability to coordinate attacks. Without leadership, they'll fall apart." Tomas raised a hand hesitantly. "What about casualties? We've already lost so many." Leo's jaw tightened. "I won't lie, it's going to be ugly. But staying here and waiting for them to wipe us out isn't an option either. This is our best shot." After some debate, the group agreed to proceed. Preparations began immediately, with villagers crafting new weapons, fortifying positions, and memorizing routes through the forest. Morale remained fragile, but determination burned brightly in everyone's eyes. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for hope. On the night of the operation, the air was thick with tension. Clouds obscured the moon, plunging the forest into near-total darkness. Each team moved silently, guided only by whispered instructions and years of familiarity with the land. Team 1 reached the riverbank first, setting fire to piles of dry brush and debris. Flames leapt skyward, casting flickering shadows across the water. The noise drew immediate attention, and squads of invaders rushed toward the commotion, leaving their rear defenses weakened. Meanwhile, Team 2 crept closer to the invaders' communications hub. Using tools scavenged from the village, they dismantled critical components of the system, severing links between the invaders' units. Alarms blared as the invaders realized what was happening, but by then, it was too late, their coordination was fractured. Finally, Leo led Team 3 toward the heart of the enemy camp. The journey was harrowing, every step carried the risk of discovery. At one point, they narrowly avoided a patrol by hiding beneath a cluster of fallen logs. When the coast was clear, Leo signaled for the team to move forward. As they approached the command center, Leo felt a surge of adrenaline. The structure loomed ahead, its metallic walls gleaming faintly in the dim light. Guards patrolled outside, their movements mechanical and precise. "This is it," Leo whispered to his team. "Stay sharp." With a nod, 2 members of Team 3 hurled makeshift grenades, bundles of explosive powder wrapped in cloth, at the guards. The blast sent shockwaves rippling through the area, scattering the invaders and creating an opening for the rest of the team to rush inside. Inside the compound, chaos reigned. Invaders scrambled to respond to the sudden assault, but without functional communications, their efforts were disjointed. Leo and his team fought their way deeper into the building, taking down enemies with quick, decisive strikes. Blood pounded in Leo's ears as he pushed onward, driven by a single goal, reaching the leader. When they finally burst into the command room, they found the invader commander standing calmly amidst the turmoil. Unlike the others, he didn't seem surprised, or afraid. Instead, he regarded Leo with cold detachment, as though sizing him up. "You humans are persistent," the commander said, his voice laced with disdain. "But persistence alone won't save you." "It's not just persistence," Leo replied, stepping forward. "It's resolve. Something you'll never understand." Before the commander could react, Leo lunged, driving the curved blade Mira had given him toward the being's chest. Sparks flew as the weapon struck armor, but the force of the blow sent the commander stumbling backward. Seizing the advantage, the rest of Team 3 swarmed in, overwhelming the remaining defenders. When the dust settled, the command center was theirs. Screens flickered and died as the invaders' systems collapsed, cutting off their ability to coordinate further attacks. Outside, confused and disorganized, the invaders began withdrawing, retreating to safer ground. The villagers had dealt a crippling blow. Back in the village, celebrations were muted but heartfelt. People tended to the wounded, shared stories of bravery, and mourned those who had fallen. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a glimmer of hope, not just for survival, but for eventual victory. Yet, as Leo stood among his people, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. The invaders wouldn't abandon their mission easily. More ships would come, more soldiers would arrive, and the battles would grow fiercer. Still, one thing was certain: the villagers had proven themselves capable of standing toe-to-toe with an enemy once thought unbeatable. And in doing so, they had ignited a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. As dawn broke over the valley, painting the world in soft golden light, Leo looked out at the faces of his people. Tired, bloodied, but unbowed. "We've shown them what war means," he said quietly, his words carrying across the quiet morning air. "Now let's show them what peace looks like when it's earned." The villagers cheered, their voices rising like a tide against the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The fight wasn't over, but neither was their spirit. The days following the assault on the invaders' command center were a blur of activity. The villagers worked tirelessly to fortify their defenses, knowing full well that the invaders wouldn't retreat for long. Scouting parties reported increased movement in the skies, more ships arriving, larger numbers gathering in distant camps. It was clear the invaders were preparing for one final, decisive push. Leo felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like never before. He had led his people through battles they hadn't thought they could win, but now he faced a challenge unlike any other. The invaders weren't just fighting to claim the land anymore, they were fighting to restore their pride. To prove that no primitive society could stand against their empire. "This is it," Leo said during a meeting with the elders and key fighters. "They're coming for us with everything they've got. If we lose this fight, there won't be another chance." Mira, seated beside him, nodded grimly. Her hands were calloused from weeks of hard labor, her face smudged with dirt and ash. Yet her eyes burned with determination. "Then we make sure we don't lose." Elias leaned forward, his weathered face lined with worry. "We can't match them head-on. Their numbers are too great, their weapons too advanced. We need something else, something unexpected." Leo glanced at Mira, then back at the group. "What if we use their strength against them?" Over the next few days, the villagers implemented a plan so audacious it seemed almost reckless. Using materials scavenged from the invaders' previous attacks, discarded energy cells, fragments of armor, and pieces of machinery, they constructed traps throughout the forest. Hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes, tripwires rigged to trigger explosive charges, and decoy villages designed to draw the enemy into ambush zones became their new arsenal. But the centerpiece of their strategy was something even more daring: a counterattack. "We'll let them come to us," Leo explained to the villagers as they prepared. "When they think they've broken through our defenses, we'll hit them from behind. Cut off their escape routes, destroy their reinforcements, and force them to fight on our terms." It was a risky gamble, one that required perfect timing and absolute trust in each other. But the villagers had no choice. This was their home, their land, their future. They would defend it to the last breath. The invaders struck at dawn, their ships descending like storm clouds over the valley. Columns of soldiers marched toward the village, their weapons glowing ominously in the early morning light. Behind them came tanks and armored vehicles, crushing trees and flattening terrain as they advanced. At first, the villagers held their ground, firing arrows tipped with flammable oil, hurling rocks, and setting off crude explosives. The invaders faltered briefly under the barrage, but their sheer numbers soon overwhelmed the initial defenses. One by one, the outer barriers fell, and the invaders pushed deeper into the village. "They're falling for it," Tomas shouted as he fired a makeshift catapult at an approaching tank. The projectile missed its mark but forced the vehicle to swerve, buying precious seconds for the villagers to retreat. "Keep moving," Leo called out, rallying his people. "Lure them in." As planned, the villagers gradually pulled back, leading the invaders deeper into the forest. The traps began to take effect. Hidden pits swallowed entire squads, tripwires triggered explosions that sent shrapnel flying, and decoy structures collapsed under the weight of advancing troops. Chaos erupted among the invaders as their carefully coordinated assault unraveled. Meanwhile, Leo and a small strike team slipped behind enemy lines. Moving silently through the dense undergrowth, they targeted supply depots, destroyed communication relays, and sabotaged reinforcements before they could reach the front lines. Each blow weakened the invaders further, sowing confusion and panic. But the tide of battle remained uncertain. Despite their clever tactics, the villagers were outnumbered and outgunned. Exhaustion gnawed at their resolve, and injuries mounted with every passing hour. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the invaders regrouped and pressed forward with renewed ferocity. By midday, the situation grew dire. The invaders had breached the inner perimeter of the village, setting fire to homes and driving the villagers toward the riverbank. Smoke choked the air, and the roar of flames drowned out all other sounds. Many villagers fought desperately to hold the line, but others began to falter, their spirits crushed by the relentless onslaught. Leo stood at the edge of the chaos, watching as his people struggled to survive. His body ached from countless wounds, his mind clouded by fatigue. For a moment, doubt crept in, had he led them to their doom? Then he saw her. Mira emerged from the smoke, bloodied but unbroken, clutching a spear in one hand and dragging a wounded villager to safety with the other. Her eyes met his, and though she didn't speak, her message was clear: "We're not done yet." Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Leo raised his voice above the din. "This is our land," he shouted, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. "They think they can take it from us, but they're wrong. We've shown them what war means, we've shown them who we are. Now let's show them they made a mistake picking this fight." His words ignited a spark in the villagers. Tired faces hardened with resolve, and weary bodies surged forward with newfound energy. Together, they launched a desperate countercharge, driving back the invaders step by bloody step. In the midst of the chaos, Leo spotted the invader commander once more. Standing atop a hill overlooking the battlefield, the being surveyed the carnage with cold detachment. Around him, his forces wavered, their discipline crumbling under the villagers' relentless assault. "You wanted a war," Leo growled as he approached, the curved blade gleaming in his hand. "Now you've got one." The commander turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "You primitives are tenacious, I'll give you that. But your defiance will only prolong the inevitable." Leo smirked, despite the pain coursing through his body. "Maybe. Or maybe we're just getting started." With a roar, he charged, leading a final, furious assault that sent the invaders reeling. The commander fought fiercely, but without the support of his fractured army, he was no match for the united fury of the villagers. One by one, the remaining invaders fell, until only silence remained. When the dust settled, the village lay in ruins, but the invaders were gone. Ships rose into the sky, retreating for good. The villagers gathered amidst the wreckage, battered but alive, their hearts heavy with loss but buoyed by triumph. Leo looked out at his people, tears streaming down his face. They had paid a terrible price, but they had won. Against all odds, they had proven that courage, unity, and determination could overcome even the most overwhelming foe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the valley in warm hues of orange and red, Leo spoke softly to those around him. "We showed them what war means," he said. "But now it's time to rebuild. To heal. And to remember why we fought, to protect what matters most. The villagers cheered, their voices rising like a song of hope against the backdrop of destruction. The war was over. And though scars would remain, so too would the spirit of those who refused to yield.